Before we begin this tale of a woman who refused to stay broken, I need your help. If stories of resilience, forbidden romance, and justice against those who thought they could destroy us speak to your heart, please, and I truly mean this, hit that like button and subscribe to the Duchess's Secret. Your support is what allows me to keep bringing you these historical tales of courage and love. And do leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and it brings such joy to my heart. Amid whispered scandal and society's cruel judgment, Lady Grace Preston had become a living ghost. For 5 years, she'd been nothing but a warning: stand in your corner, wear your black, and disappear. But then, the Duke of War appeared, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers. He crossed the ballroom like a man marching to battle. "Dance with me," he commanded. "What happens next will change everything." Hello, lovely. If you're drawn to this historical tale of resilience and romance, I'd be ever so grateful for a like or subscribe. It truly helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, do tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every word, and it brings such joy to my heart. Lady Grace Preston had perfected the art of invisibility. She stood in her designated corner of the Ashington Ballroom, a shadow draped in unrelenting black silk, while the rest of society swirled around her in pastels and jewel tones. At 31, she should have been in the prime of her life, married perhaps, with children, managing her own household. Instead, she occupied this peculiar purgatory, present but unseen, invited but unwelcome, alive but not quite living. The black mourning dress had become her uniform. 5 years she'd worn it, as her father had ordered, not for a death in the family, but for something he considered far worse: the death of her virtue, her reputation, her value as a woman. The severe cut of the gown did nothing to flatter her figure, and the unrelenting color drained what little warmth remained in her complexion. Her chestnut hair, which had once been her vanity, was pulled back so tightly it seemed an act of penance. Every strand scraped away from her face and pinned with brutal efficiency at the nape of her neck. She might have been lovely once. The delicate bone structure was still there, the wide green eyes that had once sparkled with ambition. But 5 years of shame had carved shadows beneath those eyes, had taught her mouth to forget how to smile, except in the brittle, meaningless way required for basic courtesy. "Poor Lady Grace Preston," came a voice from nearby, pitched just loud enough to ensure she would hear. "Still wearing black after 5 years. One would think the mourning period for her dignity would have ended by now." Grace didn't turn. She'd learned not to. 3 young debutantes in pastel gowns, a confection of coral, a vision in mint green, a dream in butter yellow, clustered near the refreshment table, their fans fluttering like butterfly wings as they whispered. They were perhaps 19 or 20, in the full bloom of their first or second seasons, their faces alight with the certainty that the world would give them everything they desired. Grace had been like them once, a lifetime ago. "Mama says she's fortunate to even receive invitations," the girl in coral continued, loud enough that several nearby matrons turned to look. "If I were ruined like that, I'd have retired to the country permanently. At least she'd have the decency not to remind everyone of her disgrace." The girl in mint green leaned closer to her companions, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried even better than her normal tone. "I heard she was caught with a stable hand. Viscount Whitmore had no choice but to abandon her at the altar. Can you imagine? The wedding breakfast already prepared, the church full of guests, and he simply didn't arrive." Grace kept her face perfectly expressionless, her breathing steady and controlled. This was her talent now, the ability to stand amid verbal arrows and show no sign they'd landed. Her hands, encased in black gloves, remained folded calmly before her. Not a tremor, not a flinch. These girls reminded her of who she'd been at 26, hopeful, ambitious, engaged to Viscount Thomas Whitmore. She'd had dreams then, plans for the future. She'd believed in justice, in truth, in the fundamental fairness of the world. How wonderfully naive she'd been. She knew the truth, of course, forged letters in handwriting that mimicked hers too well, paid servants willing to testify to improprieties that never happened. A conspiracy she hadn't seen coming until it destroyed her. But truth didn't matter when reputation was already ashes. Society had decided her guilt, and society's verdict was final. The orchestra faltered mid-waltz, the music dying into discordant silence. Grace looked up, curiosity penetrating the numbness that usually insulated her from ballroom drama. The entire room had turned toward the entrance. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd like wind across water. His Grace, Nathan Akhtar, Duke of Thornfield! The footman's announcement cut through the silence like a blade. Grace craned her neck slightly, trying to see past the wall of bodies that blocked her view. She'd heard of the Duke, of course. Everyone had. The Duke of War, they called him. A legend who'd distinguished himself in the colonies, shown no mercy to enemies, and returned to England only to lose his young wife Danielle under mysterious circumstances 3 years ago. Since then, he'd become a recluse, fulfilling his ducal duties with ruthless efficiency but attending no social functions. Until tonight. The crowd parted, and Grace finally saw him. Tall. That was her first impression. Well over 6 feet, with the kind of bearing that came from years of military command. His shoulders were broad beneath his impeccably tailored evening coat, his posture rigidly perfect in a way that suggested discipline rather than ease. His skin was the color of burnished bronze, his hair dark and cut shorter than was fashionable, a soldier's haircut, practical and severe. But it was his face that arrested attention. Handsome, yes, in a harsh, uncompromising way. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. And his eyes, even from across the ballroom, Grace could see they were obsidian dark, cold, and assessing. He looked like a man carved from stone, beautiful and utterly remote. The Duke didn't smile as he entered, didn't acknowledge the bows and curtsies that rippled around him. His dark eyes scanned the ballroom with the methodical assessment of a general surveying a battlefield, and then his gaze landed on her. Grace's breath caught. There was a door to the terrace just behind her corner. That must be his destination. He needed air, needed to escape the oppressive attention. She should step aside, make room for him to pass. But she found herself frozen, unable to move as he crossed the polished floor with deliberate purpose, his eyes fixed on her. The ballroom fell into complete breathless silence. Every eye turned to watch the cold Duke of War walk directly toward the corner where the ruined Lady Grace Preston stood in her black mourning dress. It wasn't possible. He couldn't be. He stopped directly in front of her. Up close. He was even more imposing. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Broad-shouldered enough to block out the rest of the ballroom. And those eyes... God, those eyes were the coldest thing she'd ever seen. No warmth, no kindness, just an icy assessment that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. He extended his hand, not in greeting, but in command. Lady Grace Preston. His voice cut through the silence like a blade, deep and carrying the faint accent of someone who'd spent years abroad. You will dance with me. Now. The ballroom might as well have exploded. Grace heard gasps, shocked whispers, the rustle of fans and skirts as every person in the room leaned forward to witness this impossible moment. Your Grace, Ruth's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat, tried again. There must be some mistake. One dark eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. There is no mistake, Lady Grace. I am asking you to dance. Asking was generous. His tone suggested this was anything but a request. Grace looked around desperately. Every face in the ballroom was turned toward them. The debutantes who'd been whispering about her moments ago looked stunned. Their ambitious mothers looked furious. The gentlemen looked confused and fascinated in equal measure. And the Duke stood before her, hand extended, waiting with the patience of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed. Something about that absolute certainty penetrated Grace's shock. She found herself looking directly into those cold obsidian eyes, searching for what? Mockery? Cruelty? Some elaborate joke at her expense? But she saw none of those things. Just ice and determination, and something else she couldn't quite name. Her hand trembled as she extended it, placing her black-gloved fingers in his larger palm. His hand closed around hers with firm, unshakable certainty. The ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath as the Duke of Thornfield led the ruined Lady Grace Preston onto the dance floor. Grace's legs felt weak, unstable. She hadn't danced in 5 years, not since the scandal. Her body remembered the steps. Years of dancing lessons were impossible to forget, but her heart pounded so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. The Duke positioned her with military precision, one hand at her waist, the other holding her hand at the proper height. Even through the layers of fabric, through her gloves and his, she could feel the heat of his palm, the strength in his fingers. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once to the orchestra conductor. The musicians who had been frozen in shock scrambled to attention. The opening strains of a waltz filled the ballroom, and the Duke began to lead. He danced the way he did everything else, Grace suspected, with absolute control and perfect precision. Every step was exact, every turn calculated. He guided her through the waltz as if he were commanding troops, and her body, starved for movement and music after 5 years of stillness, responded without conscious thought. They were the only couple on the floor. Every other person in the ballroom had retreated to the edges, watching this impossible spectacle. The cold Duke of War dancing with society's most notorious scandal. "Why are you doing this?" Grace whispered, her voice shaking. "Everyone is staring." "Let them stare." His voice remained cold, emotionless. "I've faced enemy fire, Lady Grace. I can certainly face their judgment." "But I cannot," she said desperately. "You don't understand what this will cost me." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, as if he'd seen something in her that resonated with something in himself. "And you don't understand what it has already cost me to walk into this room." Grace looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw past the ice to the man beneath. Saw the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes, the way he held himself with the rigid control of someone barely keeping themselves together. He was suffering, just as she was suffering. Different circumstances, different losses, but the same fundamental isolation, the same terrible loneliness of being surrounded by people and utterly, completely alone. Then the waltz ended. The Duke stepped back, released her waist, but kept hold of her hand. He bowed with formal correctness, and Grace, operating on instinct and years of training, curtsied. Before he released her hand completely, he leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Tomorrow, Hyde Park, the Serpentine. Dawn, I will expect you. Then he let go of her hand, turned on his heel, and walked directly out of the ballroom. He didn't say goodbye to the hostess, didn't acknowledge the stunned crowd. He simply left, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor until he was gone. Grace stood in the center of the ballroom, alone under the massive chandelier, every candle flame seeming to spotlight her isolation. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. The whispers began immediately, a low susurration that built and built until it felt like a physical force. Did that really just happen? The Duke danced with her? What could he possibly want with Lady Grace Preston? Grace's mother materialized at her elbow, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. Grace, we're leaving. Now! But Grace barely heard her. She was still standing in the center of the ballroom, still feeling the ghost of the Duke's hand at her waist, still hearing his voice in her ear. Tomorrow, dawn, I will expect you. Her carefully maintained invisibility had been shattered in the span of a single waltz, and Grace didn't know whether to feel terrified or alive for the first time in 5 years. Perhaps, she thought, as her mother dragged her toward the exit past the staring faces and whispered speculation, perhaps it was possible to feel both. The carriage lurched forward, and Grace braced herself against the velvet seat, though the motion was nothing compared to the turbulence in her chest. Her mother sat across from her, rigid as carved marble, her face pinched with an emotion Grace couldn't quite name. Fury, certainly, but also anxiety, calculation, and something that might have been desperate hope. Beside their mother, Amelia, dear, practical Amelia, watched Grace with undisguised curiosity. At 27, her younger sister had already been married for 3 years to Baron Ashworth, a respectable man with a comfortable estate in Derbyshire. Amelia had done everything correctly: a modest debut, a sensible courtship, a proper wedding. She was living proof that the Preston family could produce acceptable daughters. Grace was the aberration. What did you do? Lady Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. What did you say to him? How did you possibly attract the Duke's attention? Grace's exhaustion ran bone deep. I did nothing, Mama. I was standing in my corner as always. He approached me. That's impossible. Her mother's gloved hands twisted in her lap. Dukes don't approach ruined women in corners unless they've been given some encouragement, some signal. I gave no signal. Grace's voice came out flat, drained of inflection. I spoke to no one. I did nothing but stand where I've stood at every ball for 5 years. He walked across the ballroom and commanded me to dance. That's all. Amelia leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her usual discretion. But why would the cold Duke single you out, Grace? Everyone says he's been in mourning for Lady Danielle. He hasn't attended a social function in 3 years. Why break his seclusion for... She trailed off, perhaps realizing how her sentence would end. For you. For a scandal-tainted spinster in a black dress. I don't know why, Grace said quietly. This is a disaster. Lady Victoria pressed her fingers to her temples. Your father will be apoplectic. We've worked so hard to keep you invisible, to let the scandal fade into memory, and now you've put yourself at the center of attention again. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be discussing this. Grace looked out the carriage window at the dark London streets sliding past. The whispers never stopped, Mama. They only quieted to a level you found tolerable. Don't be impertinent, her mother's voice sharpened. You have no idea what your father and I have endured these 5 years. The social embarrassment, the questions, the way people look at us with pity or contempt. I have some idea, Grace interrupted softly, given that I'm the one who stands in corners while they stare. The carriage fell silent. Grace's bedroom felt like a sanctuary after the ordeal of the ballroom. She dismissed Sarah quickly, needing solitude more than assistance, and sank onto the bench before her dressing table. The face that stared back from the mirror was a stranger's. Or perhaps it was her own face, finally seen clearly after years of deliberate blindness. 31 years old, still young technically, though she felt ancient. Her skin was pale, too pale, like something kept in darkness too long. The severe hairstyle pulled her features into sharp relief. With trembling fingers, Grace began removing the pins from her hair. One by one, she pulled them free until the chestnut mass tumbled down around her shoulders. The candlelight caught the red-gold highlights, making it glow like burnished copper. When had she last worn her hair down? When had she last looked at herself with anything other than resignation or shame? She ran her fingers through the waves, remembering. Her hair had been her vanity once. Thomas had complimented it, said it reminded him of autumn leaves. She'd blushed and smiled, and thought herself fortunate to have attracted such a suitable match. Who might she have been without the scandal? The question surprised her. She'd spent 5 years mourning the loss of that future, but she'd never actually asked whether it would have brought her joy. Thomas had been kind, she supposed, attentive during their courtship, if not particularly passionate. Their conversations had been pleasant but shallow, the weather, mutual acquaintances, safe topics that required no real intimacy. He'd never asked her opinions on anything of substance, never seemed curious about her thoughts or dreams. The memory rose unbidden, vivid as the day it happened. 5 years ago, the day before her wedding. She'd been summoned to the Whitmore estate, an unusual request, but not alarming. Perhaps Thomas wanted to discuss some detail of the ceremony, but it wasn't Thomas who met her in the drawing room. Lady Rosie Butler stood by the fireplace, beautiful and cold as a winter morning. Thomas's older sister had never liked Grace. That much had been clear from their first meeting. Rosie was 29 and unmarried, devoted to her brother with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Lady Grace. Rosie's voice had been cordial, but her eyes were chips of ice. Thank you for coming. I'm afraid I have something rather distressing to show you. Grace had felt the first flutter of unease. Is Thomas well? My brother is distraught, as he should be. Rosie gestured to a letter on the side table. We discovered this yesterday. Grace picked up the letter with trembling hands. It was written in a feminine hand, a hand that looked remarkably like her own. The content made her blood run cold. A love letter, explicit and passionate, describing intimate encounters. Addressed to James, the Whitmore family's head stable hand, and signed with her name. This is not mine, Grace had whispered. I didn't write this. I've never... There's more. Rosie's voice was relentless. 2 servants have come forward. They claim to have seen you in compromising positions with James. One saw you in the stables late at night. Another witnessed an embrace behind the garden folly. That's a lie. Grace's voice rose. I've never been alone with any servant. I would never... The door opened. Thomas stood in the threshold, his face a mask of pain and fury. How could you, Grace? His voice broke. I trusted you. I was going to make you my wife. Thomas, please, this is all lies. Someone has fabricated this. 2 witnesses, Grace, 2 members of our staff, both willing to testify. And that letter is in your hand. It's not my hand. Someone forged it. But even as she said it, Grace knew how it sounded. Desperate. Guilty. Thomas's face hardened. The wedding is cancelled. I'll send notice to the church and the guests. You should return home and prepare your family for the disgrace. As Grace left, she'd looked past Thomas to where Rosie stood, and for just a moment, she'd seen it, the ghost of a smile on Rosie's perfect face. Satisfaction, cold and complete. A sharp knock jolted Grace from the memory. Enter. Her father stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. My study. Now. Lord William Preston's study was designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, a massive desk positioned like a judge's bench. He sat behind it, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The Duke of Thornfield danced with you tonight. Yes, father. The entire town is gossiping. I've already had 3 callers. What are his intentions? Grace met her father's gaze steadily. He commanded me to meet him tomorrow, Hyde Park, the Serpentine, dawn. Something flickered in her father's expression. Hope, perhaps, or calculation. Then you will go, and you will be agreeable. Agreeable? If the Duke has taken an interest in you, it could redeem this family's name. Your scandal cost us dearly, Grace. Doors that were open are now closed. If the Duke of Thornfield chooses to associate with you, it would restore some of what we've lost. He paused. Perhaps he requires a wife already broken. Someone who won't expect affection, who will be grateful for whatever scraps of respectability he offers. The words should have hurt. Perhaps they did, somewhere beneath the numbness. You'll go to Hyde Park. You'll be demure, modest, agreeable. If he makes an offer, you'll accept it. Do you understand? Yes, father. Good. Now go. Later, alone in her bedroom, Grace sat at her writing desk, blank paper before her. She tried to write to the Duke. Something. Anything. But each attempt felt wrong. Too formal. Too intimate. Too desperate. She gave up. Sat in darkness imagining life as Duchess of Thornfield, managing a grand estate, bearing children for a man who would never love her. Better than her current existence? Yes. Dignity, purpose, escape. But happiness? That was a different question entirely. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sarah slipped inside, her face troubled. My lady, this just arrived. A footman brought it to the servants' entrance. Grace took the letter. No direction, no sender's name, just a crimson wax seal, already broken. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Lady Grace, you think the Duke's interest will save you? You're wrong. Return to the shadows where you belong, or I will ensure your new ruin eclipses the old. You were meant to disappear. I will make certain of it. No signature, just threat. Grace's blood ran cold. Someone was watching. Someone wanted her powerless. But who? And why now? Hyde Park at dawn was a different world entirely. Grace arrived in darkness before sunrise. The park nearly deserted, save for a few early morning riders in the distance. Mist rose from the Serpentine like breath, and swans glided silently across the water's surface, ghostly in the half-light. Nathan was already there. He stood at the water's edge, utterly still, hands clasped behind his back in a military stance that spoke of years of discipline. He was dressed impeccably, but without ostentation. Dark coat, riding boots, everything understated and severe. He stared at the water with the focus of a man seeing something other than what was before him. Grace recognized that stillness. She'd practiced it herself for 5 years, the art of holding yourself together through sheer force of will. She approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the damp grass. "Your Grace, I've come as you commanded." He turned, and those obsidian eyes swept over her with the same assessing look he'd given her in the ballroom. "I don't recall commanding you, Lady Grace. I recall expecting you. There's a difference." Grace felt a flicker of irritation penetrate her anxiety. "To most people, Your Grace, your expectations sound remarkably like commands." Was that amusement that flickered across his face? It was gone too quickly to be certain. "Walk with me." There it was again, phrased as an invitation, but delivered as an order. Grace fell into step beside him, maintaining the proper distance for a respectable conversation. They walked in silence for several moments, following the curve of the serpentine. Grace's mind raced, trying to anticipate what he might say, what he might want. "I'm going to ask you a question, Lady Grace." Nathan stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "And I expect an honest answer." Grace's breath caught. "Very well, Your Grace. Did you commit the indiscretion for which you've been punished these 5 years?" The directness of it startled her. No polite circumlocution, no delicate dancing around the scandal, just a blunt demand for truth. Grace met his gaze directly. "No, Your Grace." "I did not." He studied her face with those winter-dark eyes, and she had the unsettling sensation of being thoroughly evaluated. "Then why have you accepted the punishment?" "Because proving innocence requires evidence I don't possess. An accusation requires only rumor." Grace heard the bitterness in her own voice. "In society's mathematics, Your Grace, I was always going to lose that equation." Something shifted in his expression. "You're more intelligent than you pretend to be." "Intelligent women in black dresses learn to hide it, Your Grace. Society prefers us decorative and docile." This time she was certain. That was amusement in his eyes, brief but genuine. "I have a proposition for you, Lady Grace." Her heart sank. Of course, this was about a proposition in the uglier sense, a duke wanting a discreet mistress, a woman already ruined who— "I require a wife." Grace's thoughts scattered. "I beg your pardon?" "My father's will stipulates I must marry and produce an heir within 5 years of his death, or the estate passes to my cousin." His voice remained flat, emotionless, as if discussing a business transaction. "That deadline approaches. I need to marry." "I see. I don't want a society wife," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "I don't want girlish expectations or romantic delusions. I don't want a woman who looks at me with hope and dreams of love. I want someone who understands that marriage can be a contract between two people who have already survived their worst moments." Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. "You want someone already broken?" "No." His voice sharpened. "I want someone already strong. There's a difference, Lady Grace. Broken things shatter further under pressure. Strong things that have been tested and survived, they endure." Grace didn't know what to say. This was insane. A duke proposing a practical marriage to a ruined woman he'd met exactly once. "Why me, Your Grace? You could choose any woman in London." "Because when I walked into that ballroom last night, every woman looked at me with hope, calculation, or greed." His jaw tightened. "You were the only one who looked at me with understanding." "Understanding of what?" Grace whispered. "What it's like to be alone in a crowded room." The words hung between them, weighted with shared pain. Grace took a breath, feeling something shift inside her. 5 years of corners and whispers, 5 years of being told what she would do, who she would be. Perhaps it was time to take control of her own fate. I have terms of my own, Your Grace. Nathan raised an eyebrow. You're hiding something about your wife's death. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, the fear in your eyes when you mention her. Nathan went very still. And you know I'm hiding the truth about my scandal, because you're a military strategist and you assessed me the moment we met. He said nothing, but she saw the calculation in his eyes. Grace pressed forward. So here are my revised terms. Yes, we marry. Yes, I'll provide an heir. But we also investigate together. You help me prove my innocence and expose whoever destroyed me. I help you discover the truth about your wife's death. A partnership, Your Grace, not just a transaction. Nathan studied her for a long moment. That's far more dangerous than a simple marriage of convenience. I've lived in corners for 5 years, Your Grace. I'm ready for danger. You realize this means trusting each other? Completely. I realize it means fighting together. That's worth the risk. If we do this, our enemies, whoever they are, will come for us. They'll try to destroy what we're building. Grace met his eyes steadily. Let them try. I'm done being destroyed without fighting back. Nathan extended his hand, not for a kiss, but as if sealing a military pact. Then we have an alliance, Lady Grace. I'll call on your father today. We marry in 2 weeks. Grace shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip. 2 weeks? That's extraordinarily fast. Speed is a tactical advantage. Gives our enemies less time to organize against us. Grace felt the first real hope she'd experienced in 5 years. Then we're at war, Your Grace. Yes. His expression was fierce, determined. But this time, you have an ally. As they turned to part, Nathan stopped. One more thing. The threatening letter you received last night. Show it to me when I call today. Grace's breath caught. How did you? I have my sources. And Lady Grace? His obsidian eyes held hers. Whoever sent it just made their first mistake. They revealed they're watching. Now we can watch back. As Grace's carriage pulled away, she looked back at Nathan standing by the Serpentine, silhouetted against the rising sun. Not just the cold Duke of War, but something more. A chess player, a strategist, an ally. 5 years ago, someone had destroyed her and faced no consequences, but now she had weapons she didn't have then. Truth, partnership, and the Duke of War himself. This time, she wasn't going down without a fight. The Preston family dining room had never felt smaller. Grace sat at the table, her untouched soup growing cold, while her parents and sister stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to calculation to concern. The Duke has called, her father announced, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. He's proposed marriage. Grace has accepted. Her mother's teacup clattered against its saucer. Marriage? To you? But why would he? The terms are acceptable. Lord William cut her off with sharp authority. They marry in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Amelia leaned forward, her pretty face creased with worry. Grace, he's the cold Duke. Everyone says he's never recovered from Danielle's death. A man like that, he'll make you miserable. Grace met her sister's eyes, saw genuine concern there, and felt something crack in her chest. I'm already miserable, Amelia. At least as a Duchess, I'll be miserable with dignity. The truth of the words hung in the air, undeniable. Lord William sat back, satisfaction evident in his features. You'll accept this alliance and be grateful. This restores what your scandal destroyed. Miles across London, In the dim study of Thornfield House, Nathan sat surrounded by ghosts. The room had been Danielle's favorite. He'd preserved it exactly as she'd left it, the embroidery frame still holding her last unfinished project, her books on the side table, the cushions arranged just as she'd liked them. Even the air seemed suspended, caught in amber, refusing to acknowledge that 3 years had passed. On the wall, Danielle's portrait gazed down at him. She'd been 24 when it was painted, 2 years before her death. Beautiful in the way of porcelain dolls, blonde, delicate, with wide blue eyes that had always seemed slightly unfocused, as if seeing something beyond the present moment. She'd been fragile. Everyone had said so. Prone to melancholy, to nerves, to days spent in darkened rooms when the world became too much. Nathan had tried to protect her, to shelter her from anything that might disturb her delicate constitution. He'd failed. The brandy in his glass caught the firelight, amber and warm. Nathan stared into it, seeing nothing. "Your Grace." Matthew stood in the doorway, his lined face creased with concern. The valet had been with Nathan since his first commission. "You should sleep. You've been in here for hours." "I proposed to Lady Grace Preston today." Matthew was silent for a long moment. "I see. And has she accepted?" "She will. She already has." "Forgive me, Your Grace, but why Lady Grace? There are many ladies who would—" "Because she won't expect me to love her." Nathan cut him off, his voice sharp. "She won't look at me with hope and dreams and expect me to be something I'm not capable of being." Matthew said nothing, but his silence was eloquent. Nathan stood, walked to Danielle's desk. His fingers traced the smooth wood, remembering. "I failed her, Matthew. I won't fail another wife by making promises I can't keep." After Matthew withdrew, Nathan opened the locked drawer in Danielle's desk. Inside, beneath letters from her mother and pressed flowers from their courtship, lay the note that haunted him. He'd read it 1,000 times, had memorized every loop of her handwriting, every ink blot, every tremor in the letters that showed how her hand had shaken. "Nathan, forgive me. I cannot live with what she has done to us, with the poison she's fed me, in words, in deeds, in my very tea. Rosie promised she loved me like a sister, but sisters don't destroy. I'm so tired, my love. So very tired. The baby, I don't even know if it's yours anymore. Forgive me." D. For 3 years, Nathan had wrestled with this note. The doctors had said wasting illness, weakness, fever, then sudden decline. But this note suggested something else entirely. Poison? Actual poison? And that final line, "I don't even know if it's yours anymore." Was Danielle unfaithful? Assaulted? Simply confused in her final moments? He'd been too destroyed by grief to question it then, too consumed by guilt to demand answers. But now, sitting in her preserved room, thinking about Grace's situation, a woman falsely accused, destroyed by others' actions, something shifted in his mind. What if Danielle's death was an illness? What if someone had orchestrated it? The same pattern: manipulation, false evidence, destroyed lives. And Rosie Butler's name in Danielle's note, Rosie Butler. Could she be connected to Grace's scandal as well? Nathan made a decision. Tomorrow he would show Grace this note. They needed all information to fight effectively. Grace was preparing for bed when Sarah entered with another letter. The same crimson seal. Grace's hands trembled as she broke the wax. "Did you think I wouldn't notice the Duke at your door? Every happiness you grasp will turn to ash. You should have stayed broken, Grace. Now I'll have to break you again, and him along with you. Some ghosts should stay buried. Danielle's secrets, your secrets, all of them will come to light, and when they do, society will know exactly what kind of woman the Duke is marrying. Return to your corner or face consequences far worse than 5 years of black dresses. Grace's blood ran cold. The writer knew about Danielle's death and her scandal. This wasn't random, it was someone with intimate knowledge of both situations. "My lady," Sarah said quietly, "the crimson seal, I've seen it before, but I can't quite place where." Grace looked up sharply. "Think, Sarah. Where have you seen it?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "It's distinctive. Most ladies use traditional colors: blue, gold, green. Crimson is rather bold, aggressive. Someone who wants to be noticed, or someone making a point." Sarah's eyes widened with sudden memory. "Wait. Lady Rosie Butler. I saw her seal letters with crimson wax at a tea party 2 years ago. She said it reminded her of roses, her name. She found it amusing." Grace went very still. Rosie Butler, the woman who had orchestrated her ruin 5 years ago. And if Nathan's wife had mentioned Rosie in connection with her death, it was the same person, the same villain, destroying both of them. Grace immediately crossed to her writing desk, hands shaking as she penned an urgent note. "Your Grace, I know who our enemy is. Lady Rosie Butler. She destroyed me 5 years ago, and I believe she's connected to your wife's death. We need to meet, tomorrow, before we take any public steps. We're facing the same predator, and she's already moving against us." "Grace." She thrust the letter at Sarah. "Take this to Thornfield House, now. It's urgent." As Sarah hurried out, Grace paced her room, her mind racing. Rosie had destroyed her because... why? Jealousy over Viscount Whitmore? Or was Thomas just a means to an end? If Rosie had wanted Nathan, and everything suggested she did, then Grace's engagement to Thomas 5 years ago had been an obstacle to Rosie's social positioning. Remove Grace, and Rosie would have a clearer path to Nathan through other connections. But Danielle had been Nathan's wife, so Rosie had removed her too. And now Nathan had shown interest in Grace again, and Rosie was furious. Grace stopped pacing, her jaw set with determination. "She's been planning this for years," she whispered to the empty room. "Positioning herself, and we're threatening to destroy years of careful manipulation. She'll come at us with everything she has." Grace looked at her reflection in the darkened window. No longer the defeated woman in black, but someone else entirely. Someone who had finally found a reason to fight. "Then let her come," she said softly. "This time, I'm ready for war." If you've made it to this point with Grace and Nathan, you're invested in seeing justice served. That means the world to me. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Duchess's Secret and hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow and allows me to create more stories of women who refuse to wear black and sit in corners forever. Your support is everything. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the Preston townhouse before calling hours, a scandal in itself. Grace met him in her father's study, Lord William having conveniently absented himself on urgent business. They sat across from each other without a chaperone, another breach of propriety. But they were engaged now, and the old rules mattered less. Nathan placed Danielle's suicide note on the desk between them. Grace placed her 2 threatening letters beside it. For a long moment, they sat in silence, studying the evidence that connected their separate tragedies. Nathan read the threatening letters, his face growing progressively colder with each word. Grace read Danielle's note, her hands trembling as she took in the desperate, shaking handwriting. "She mentions Rosie by name," Grace said softly. Poison she's fed me. Your Grace, do you think she meant literal poison? Nathan's jaw tightened. The doctor said wasting illness, fever, weakness, confusion, sudden decline. But those are also symptoms of certain poisons, arsenic administered slowly over time. And I don't know if it's yours anymore. The baby? Nathan stood abruptly, crossed to the window. I don't know what she meant. If someone harmed her, if Rosie... He couldn't finish the sentence. Grace rose, approached him carefully. Rosie Butler orchestrated my scandal 5 years ago, forged letters, paid servants to lie. She destroyed my engagement to her brother Thomas. Nathan turned sharply. Her brother? Viscount Whitmore is Rosie Butler's brother? Yes. She was obsessed with him, devoted in an unhealthy way. When he chose me, she eliminated the threat. Nathan began to pace, military precision in every step. 5 years ago, Rosie destroyed your engagement to her brother. Why? I thought it was jealousy, possessiveness. But what if it was strategic? What if she needed to maintain certain social connections? Danielle and Rosie were close friends, Nathan said slowly. Rosie had access to my household, to Danielle, to everything. And Danielle died 3 years ago. 2 years after my scandal. Rosie's been positioning herself as my potential second wife. Nathan's voice was tight with controlled fury, playing the loyal friend who understands my grief. Every society function I attend, she's there, offering sympathy, support. But then you showed interest in me, the woman she already destroyed, and her carefully constructed plans collapsed. They looked at each other, the realization settling between them like a stone. They'd been fighting the same enemy for years. They just hadn't known it. We need evidence, Nathan said, shifting into military mode. Speculation isn't enough to expose her publicly. The servants she paid to lie about me, where are they now? We'll find them. Servants talk. Someone knows the truth. Grace nodded. And the doctor who attended Danielle? Dr. Harrison. He's still practicing in London. I can summon him, ask pointed questions about her symptoms. What about Danielle's mother, the Dowager Countess of Bramfield? Would she have information? Pain crossed Nathan's features. We haven't spoken since the funeral. She blamed me for not protecting Danielle. Grace touched his arm gently. Perhaps it's time to speak again. She deserves to know the truth about her daughter's death. That afternoon, Nathan insisted Grace needed a new wardrobe. No more black, no more shadows. Your Grace, I've worn nothing but black for 5 years. Then it's time for a resurrection, Lady Grace. At Madame Dubois' exclusive shop, Grace tried on gown after gown. Pastels made her look insipid. Whites washed her out. Yellows felt falsely cheerful. Then her hand fell on a bolt of deep sapphire blue silk, rich, vibrant, almost regal. Ah, magnifique, Madame Dubois exclaimed. It matches your eyes perfectly, my lady. Nathan stood, examining the fabric with a critical eye. Perfect. We'll take that. And emerald green, and burgundy, nothing pale or apologetic. Grace looked at him, understanding dawning. You're choosing colors like battle standards. That's exactly what they are, Nathan said. We're declaring war on those who hurt you. Hyde Park at the fashionable hour was society's stage, and Nathan insisted they make an entrance. Grace wore her new dark blue walking dress, the first color she'd worn in 5 years, and felt simultaneously exposed and exhilarated. Every head turned. Whispers followed them like waves. The Duke and Lady Grace? Is that truly her? She's wearing color. My God, Ba. They're engaged. It's already announced in the papers. Near the Serpentine, they encountered Lady Rosie Butler. She was beautiful, golden blonde hair, delicate features, surrounded by admiring friends. When she saw them, the color drained from her face before fury twisted her expression. She approached with false sweetness. "Your Grace, what a delightful surprise! And Lady Grace? My, you look quite different." "Lady Rosie." Nathan's voice could have frozen fire. "You're acquainted with my fiancé." Rosie's smile cracked. "Your fiancé? I wasn't aware you two even knew each other." "Yes, Lady Rosie," Grace said, feeling new confidence surge through her. "We're to be married in 2 weeks." "How unexpected!" Rosie's mask was slipping. "I simply wish to ensure your Grace is making an informed decision. Lady Grace's history is rather complicated." "As is everyone's when examined closely," Nathan said coldly. "I suggest you worry less about my choices and more about your own affairs, Lady Rosie." Rosie leaned closer, desperation and venom in her voice. "Your Grace, I feel obligated to warn you. Lady Grace isn't what she seems, and there are things about dear Danielle's death that you should know. You feel obligated to do nothing except mind your own concerns." Nathan signaled their driver. "Good day, Lady Rosie." As their carriage pulled away, Grace glimpsed Rosie's face. Pure, undisguised hatred. "She'll move against us now," Nathan said. "We've provoked her." Was that wise? It was strategic. Angry enemies make mistakes. She'll act rashly, and when she does, we'll catch her. Grace studied his profile. "You really do think like a general." "It's how I survived the war, Lady Grace, and it's how we'll survive this." That evening, Nathan walked Grace to her carriage. Before she entered, he took her hand. Not a formal gesture, but something more personal. "These 2 weeks won't be easy," he said quietly. "Gossip will be vicious. Old scandals will be resurrected. Can you endure it?" Grace looked up at him. "I've endured 5 years of corners and whispers, Your Grace. 2 weeks of active battle sounds almost refreshing." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his features. "You continue to surprise me." "Good. A partnership requires equal participants. I won't be a silent, obedient Duchess." "I don't want a silent, obedient Duchess," Nathan said firmly. "I want an ally who can think and fight." As Grace's carriage pulled away, she looked back to see Nathan standing in the lamplight, no longer just the cold Duke of War, but something more dangerous, a man with purpose. "I was told to wear black and disappear forever," she thought. "But the Duke of War found me anyway, and together we're going to take down the woman who destroyed us both. Let the battle begin." 3 days later, Nathan's investigator, a retired soldier named Crawford, returned with news. He'd found 2 of the 3 servants who'd testified against Grace 5 years ago. Mary Fletcher, the former housemaid, was now working at an inn in Southwark, fallen on hard times. James Hartley, the stable hand Grace was allegedly involved with, had died 2 years ago in a suspicious accident, fell from a hayloft, though he'd been an experienced horseman. Thomas Green, the footman who'd witnessed impropriety, had disappeared completely, possibly paid to leave the country. Nathan insisted on accompanying Grace to Southwark. The 3 Crowns was shabby and desperate, exactly the sort of place where broken dreams ended up. Mary Fletcher looked aged beyond her years, thin, haunted, with eyes that had seen too much. When she saw Grace, she went pale as death. "My lady, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Grace approached gently. Mary, I need the truth. What really happened 5 years ago? Mary broke down crying. I'm so sorry, my lady. I'm so terribly sorry. Through sobs, the story emerged. Lady Rosie Butler had paid her £50, a fortune for a servant, to testify she'd seen Grace in a compromising position with James. But there'd been more than money. Rosie had threatened that if Mary refused, her younger brother, who'd stolen from his employer, would be prosecuted. I had no choice, Mary wept. Save my brother or tell the truth. James was paid and threatened too, but he started having guilt, said he'd confess the truth. A week later, he died in that accident at the stables. Grace felt ice form in her veins. Murder. They were dealing with murder. I've been living in fear ever since, Mary continued. Rosie sent messages over the years. Keep silent, or you'll end up like James. I destroyed you, my lady, and I've hated myself every day. I wanted to come forward, but I was so afraid. Grace took her trembling hand. You were a victim too, Mary. Rosie used your fear against you. Nathan leaned forward. Would you testify now? Tell the truth publicly? Mary's eyes were terrified but resolute. Yes, Your Grace. If it helps stop her. If it clears Lady Grace's name. Yes. The next day, Nathan summoned Dr. Harrison to Thornfield House. The doctor arrived nervous, clearly aware he was being questioned about a past case. Dr. Harrison, Nathan said with controlled fury, I want to discuss my late wife's illness. Every detail. The doctor described progressive weakness, confusion, stomach pains, vomiting, fever, hair loss, skin discoloration. Grace, who'd been researching, spoke quietly. Those are consistent with arsenic poisoning. Dr. Harrison looked shocked. Arsenic? Your Grace, I never considered... But yes, those symptoms could indicate... Did anyone have regular access to my wife's food and drink during her final months? Lady Rosie Butler visited frequently. She often brought tea and sweets. Said she wanted to cheer Lady Danielle up. Silence fell like a stone. Bramfield House was elegant and somber. The Dowager Countess Margaret received them in her drawing room, still dressed in mourning black. You let my daughter die, she said coldly to Nathan. Why should I speak with you? Grace stepped forward. Because we believe she was murdered, Lady Margaret, and we need your help to prove it. The Countess went very still. Murdered? By whom? Nathan showed her Danielle's suicide note. It was the first time the Countess had seen it. She read it and began weeping. She wrote me a letter too, the Countess said through tears. The week before she died. I thought it was just her melancholy, but she said Rosie was poisoning her mind, making her doubt everything. She retrieved the letter from her desk drawer. Grace read Danielle's desperate words about Rosie's visits, the tea that made her feel worse, the confusion, the fear. I was going to visit, the Countess said bitterly. I had planned to come that week, but then I received word she'd died. If I'd come sooner. This isn't your fault, Lady Margaret, Grace said firmly. Rosie is cunning. She manipulates, isolates her victims. The Countess looked up, suddenly fierce. What are you going to do? How do we stop her? We expose her, Nathan said, publicly, at the Whitmore Ball in 1 week. The ball at her own family's estate, bold. Strategic. Maximum witnesses, maximum impact, and poetic justice. Back at Thornfield House, Nathan and Grace laid out their evidence. Mary's confession, Dr. Harrison's assessment, Danielle's letters, James's suspicious death. the threatening letters with Rosie's crimson seal. "It's circumstantial," Nathan said. "A good barrister could argue coincidence." "Then we need Rosie to confess, publicly." "How do we force a confession from someone that calculating?" Grace thought for a moment. "We make her believe she's already won. Then we take it away from her." The plan took shape. Grace would send a letter to Rosie, appearing to surrender, ending the engagement, leaving London, returning to the shadows. Rosie would believe she'd broken Grace again, would become overconfident. At the Whitmore ball, Grace would appear unexpectedly. They'd orchestrate a situation where Rosie, thinking she'd won, would gloat or confess. Nathan would have witnesses positioned. Mary, Dr. Harrison, the Dowager Countess, Colonel Whitfield. When Rosie revealed herself, they'd close the trap. "Your Grace, if this fails," Grace began, "it won't fail. But if it does, we'll be destroyed, both of us." Nathan took her hands, and Grace felt the warmth of his touch through her gloves. "Then we'll be destroyed together." "I'm not afraid of that anymore, Grace. The only thing I fear is letting her win." Grace looked up at him, seeing past the cold Duke to the man beneath. "When did this stop being just about evidence and strategy?" Nathan's voice was quiet. "When I realized you weren't just my ally. You were becoming something more." Grace's breath caught. "Nathan." He pulled back slightly, professional distance reasserting itself. "Forgive me. That was inappropriate. We have a plan to execute." But something had shifted between them, partnership deepening into something neither had expected. As Grace's carriage pulled away that evening, she pressed her fingers to her lips, feeling the ghost of words unspoken between them. 5 years ago, I thought I knew what love was, she thought. I was wrong. This terrifying, exhilarating, equal partnership, this is what it means to choose someone. And God help me, I'm choosing him. The night of the Whitmore ball, Grace dressed in deep crimson, reclaiming Rosie's color as her own. The gown was embroidered with gold thread that caught the candlelight, stunning against her chestnut hair, which cascaded in elegant waves instead of being scraped back in punishment. She looked like a duchess, like a warrior, like herself for the first time in 5 years. "You look magnificent, my lady," Sarah said as she fastened the last clasp. "She won't know what hit her." Grace met her own eyes in the mirror. "That's the idea." Whitmore Estate glittered with candles and jewels, London's elite filling the grand ballroom. Rosie stood in the receiving line in a pale pink gown, playing the innocent victim. She thought Grace had surrendered. The defeat letter had seen to that. She was celebrating, confident, unguarded. The orchestra was playing when they were announced. His Grace, Duke of Thornfield, and Lady Grace Preston. The music didn't stop, but conversation died. Every eye turned to them. Rosie, in the receiving line, went absolutely white. "Your Grace. Lady Grace." Her voice strangled. "I didn't expect. That is, I thought—" "You thought I'd surrendered?" Grace's voice was calm, strong. "No, Lady Rosie. I came to fight." Nathan's voice cut through like a blade. "We need to speak with you, privately. Or would you prefer we do this publicly?" Rosie recovered, vicious. "I have no idea what you mean." "Then let's discuss it here," Grace said, "in front of everyone." Nathan signaled, and key witnesses entered the ballroom. Mary Fletcher, cleaned up and dressed respectably. Dr. Harrison, official and professional. Dowager Countess Margaret, regal in black. Colonel Whitfield, military bearing intimidating. Rosie saw them, and fear flashed across her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathan's voice carried to every corner, "forgive the interruption, but a matter of honor must be addressed." The ballroom went utterly silent. 5 years ago, Lady Grace Preston was accused of impropriety. Her engagement was ended, her reputation destroyed. She's worn black and stood in corners ever since, labeled a cautionary tale. He paused. But the accusations were lies, fabricated by someone with motive to destroy her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Mary Fletcher, would you tell these assembled guests what you told me?" Mary stepped forward, trembling but brave. "My name is Mary Fletcher. 5 years ago, I was a housemaid at Whitmore Estate. Lady Rosie Butler paid me £50 and threatened my brother's freedom to testify falsely against Lady Grace. I lied. Lady Grace is innocent. She's always been innocent." Gasps erupted. "That's absurd!" Rosie panicked. "This woman is clearly being paid." James Hartley, the stable hand who also testified, started having guilt. Nathan continued relentlessly. He told several people he planned to confess. A week later, he died in a suspicious accident. Mary has lived in fear of the same fate ever since. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, hostile. Rosie turned desperate, vicious. "Your Grace, you're clearly being manipulated. She's using you to restore her reputation. And speaking of reputations, shall we discuss your late wife? How convenient that you found someone so quickly. Perhaps you wanted Danielle gone?" She'd accused the Duke of murdering his own wife. Nathan went very still, dangerously calm. "Be very careful what you accuse me of, Lady Rosie." "Danielle was my dearest friend. She confided everything to me. She said you were cold, distant." "You dare speak of my daughter?" The Dowager Countess stepped forward, icy fury in every word. "You, who visited her daily with poisoned tea?" The ballroom erupted in shock. Dr. Harrison spoke, clinical and damning. "I attended the late Duchess in her final illness. Her symptoms, progressive weakness, vomiting, hair loss, skin discoloration, are consistent with arsenic poisoning administered over time. Lady Rosie Butler brought food and drink to the Duchess regularly during this period." "That's insane!" Rosie shrieked. "I loved Danielle. I would never—" Nathan produced Danielle's letters. "These are from my wife, one to me, one to her mother. Both mention you by name, Rosie. Both describe feeling ill after your visits. Both express fear of you." He read aloud, his voice shaking with controlled emotion. "Rosie promised she loved me like a sister, but sisters don't destroy. I'm so tired, my love. So very tired." Rosie looked around wildly. No allies, no escape. Her brother Thomas stood in the crowd, looking stricken. "Rosie, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't—" Something in her snapped. "Of course I did. All of it." The ballroom went deathly silent. "Grace was going to marry you, Thomas, and I couldn't allow it. She was nobody. I had plans. I needed you available for better alliances, so I removed her." "You destroyed an innocent woman for social positioning?" Thomas looked horrified. Rosie turned to Nathan, years of calculation crumbling. "And Danielle? Weak, pathetic Danielle, who had everything I deserved? She had you, the Duke of Thornfield, war hero, wealthy, powerful. And what did she do with it? Cried in darkened rooms, wasted it all." Her face contorted with jealousy. "I loved you. I've loved you since I first saw you. But you chose her, fragile, useless her. So I freed you. I gave you another chance." "You murdered my wife," Nathan said quietly, devastatingly. "She was dying anyway. Her melancholy, her weakness. I just hastened it. made it look natural, and then I waited. 3 years I waited for you to heal, to notice me, to choose me, but instead, you chose her again. She pointed at Grace. The woman I'd already destroyed. So yes, I sent the threats. Yes, I tried to stop this wedding because you were supposed to be mine. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Colonel Whitfield and 2 footmen approached. Lady Rosie Butler, you're under arrest for the murder of the Duchess of Thornfield. No, wait, I didn't mean. But she was led away, screaming, protesting, her mask completely shattered. Nathan turned to the assembled crowd. Lady Grace Preston has endured 5 years of unjust punishment. Her name is cleared, her reputation restored, and in 1 week, she will become my Duchess, not out of convenience, but because she is the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known. Applause erupted, genuine, not polite. Nathan offered Grace his hand. Dance with me, Lady Grace, properly this time, without commands or strategy. Just us. Grace took his hand. Always yes. As they waltzed, Grace whispered, "We did it. We won." "We survived," Nathan said. "No, we triumphed. There's a difference." Nathan looked at her with something new in his eyes. "Grace, what I said before about this being just a partnership, I know, I feel it too. I'm falling in love with you. I didn't expect to. I didn't think I could after Danielle, but you—" "I love you too," Grace said, tears falling. "Not despite our scars, but because of them, because we healed together." Nathan pulled her closer, scandalously close. "Then marry me. Not for convenience, not for strategy. Marry me because you choose me." "I choose you, Nathan, every day, for the rest of our lives." Around them, the ballroom watched, some with tears, some with joy, all witnessing something rare. True love born from shared battle. 5 years ago, Grace thought, someone told me to wear black and disappear. But then the Duke of War appeared, and together we rewrote our stories. From victim to victor, from broken to whole, from alone to beloved. 1 week after the Whitmore ball, Grace woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. The last morning she would wake as Lady Grace Preston. Sarah was already preparing the bath, laying out the wedding gown with reverent hands. "Good morning, my lady, or should I practice saying your grace?" Grace smiled. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm not a duchess until the vicar says so." "He'll say so," Sarah said confidently. "I saw the way His Grace looked at you at the ball, like you hung the stars." The bath was scented with roses, the water hot and soothing. Grace let herself sink into it, trying to calm her racing thoughts. In a few hours, she would marry Nathan Akhtar, the Duke of Thornfield, not out of convenience or strategy, but because she loved him. The door opened, and her mother entered. Lady Victoria had been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her handkerchief clutched in one hand. "Mama!" Her mother sat on the edge of the tub, shockingly informal. "Grace, I owe you an apology." Grace went very still. "Your father and we were so concerned with appearances that we forgot to fight for your innocence. When the scandal happened, we should have stood by you, demanded proof, defended you. Instead, we buried you in black and told you to be grateful for invitations. We made you invisible because it was easier than fighting for the truth." Grace felt tears rising. "Mama, I thought you believed I was guilty." "Never." Her mother's voice was fierce. "I knew you, Grace. I knew you would never do what they accused you of, but I was a coward. I was more afraid of society's judgment than I was loyal to my own daughter. I'm sorry. I'm so terribly sorry." They embraced, both crying, 5 years of pain cracking open between them. "I love you, Grace," her mother whispered, "and I'm so proud of you. Your strength, your courage, your refusal to stay broken. You're going to be a magnificent Duchess." The wedding gown was stunning, ivory silk embroidered with silver and gold thread, modern but elegant. Her chestnut hair was dressed with small white roses woven through the waves, no longer scraped back in punishment. When Grace looked in the mirror, she saw herself, truly herself, for the first time in years. Not the broken woman in black, not the invisible ghost in corners, just Grace, strong, beautiful, alive. St. George's, Hanover Square was packed to capacity. Everyone wanted to witness this wedding, the cold Duke of War marrying the woman whose name he'd cleared. Nathan stood at the altar with Colonel Whitfield as best man. Grace could see the nerves in his rigid posture despite his impeccable dress. Whitfield murmured quietly, "Steady, Thornfield. She'll be here. What if I fail her? What if I'm not enough?" "You won't fail her because you're aware of the possibility. That's what makes you different. You're present. That's what she needs." The organ began. Grace appeared at the church entrance with her father, and Nathan turned. His breath caught audibly. She was radiant, not in the delicate, fragile way Danielle had been, but in a fierce, alive way that took his breath away. As she walked toward him, Grace saw Mary Fletcher crying happy tears, the Dowager Countess smiling through grief, Amelia looking proud, even Thomas Whitmore, who'd come to publicly support her vindication. Her father stopped at the altar. "You look beautiful, Grace, like the daughter I remember from before." Grace touched his arm gently. "That daughter is gone, Father, but perhaps this new version is better." She turned to Nathan, and the world faded away. The vicar began. "If anyone present knows of any lawful impediment to this marriage," whispers rippled through the pews. "Is it true Lady Rosie confessed to murder?" "They say Lady Grace was innocent all along." Nathan spoke without turning. "Yes to both. Lady Grace has been vindicated. Lady Rosie will face justice. Now, if there are no actual impediments, may we continue?" Nervous laughter, and the ceremony proceeded. When it came time for their vows, Nathan held Grace's hands tightly, as if anchoring himself. His "I do" was strong and certain. Grace's rang out clearly, no hesitation, no fear. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Nathan pulled Grace close and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, not the chaste, formal kiss expected, but the kiss of a man claiming his partner, his equal, his love. The church erupted in applause. At the wedding breakfast at Thornfield House, the toasts were heartfelt. Colonel Whitfield raised his glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield, may they always fight together, not apart." An hour into the celebration, Nathan pulled Grace aside into his private study. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Grace felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" "I went to Danielle's memorial garden this morning, before the wedding." He paused. "I told her I was marrying you, not out of duty or convenience, but because I love you. And I told her that I'll never forget her, but I'm choosing to live again, with you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Nathan, I don't need you to erase Danielle. She was part of your life. She shaped who you are. I just need you to make room for me too. For us. For our future. Nathan kissed her forehead. Our future. I like the sound of that. Late afternoon, they departed for the country estate. Guests threw rice and rose petals as they climbed into the carriage. Finally alone, Grace leaned against Nathan's shoulder. We did it, she said. We survived our own wedding. We did more than survive. We won. What did we win? Nathan took her hand. Each other. The truth. A future. The carriage rolled through London streets toward the countryside beyond. Grace looked at her reflection in the window, no longer the woman in black, but a duchess in ivory. Nervous? Nathan asked. Terrified, exhilarated, alive, everything at once. Good. So am I. We'll figure it out together. Grace smiled. Together. I like the sound of that. The carriage disappeared into the sunset, London fading behind them, their future waiting ahead. We've reached the final phase of Grace's journey from corner to crimson, from broken to beloved. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and love born from shared battles, I'm asking you, truly asking, to subscribe to the Duchess's Secret and leave a like. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they don't have to stay invisible. Your support means I can keep telling these stories of resurrection and triumph. 6 months later, winter had settled over the Thornfield country estate like a benediction. Snow blanketed the grounds, transforming the landscape into peaceful white silence. Grace woke in the Duchess's chambers to sunlight streaming through frosted windows. She wore a soft lavender morning gown. Colors were now a natural part of her wardrobe, no longer a statement but simply who she was. Her hand drifted to her abdomen, feeling the slight swell there, barely visible. 3 months along, a child growing inside her, Nathan's child, their future, alive and real. She smiled as she felt it, a flutter of movement, like butterfly wings. The first time she'd felt it. The door to Nathan's adjoining chamber opened. He entered already dressed for riding, but stopped when he saw where her hand rested. Fear flashed in his eyes immediately. Danielle had died in childbirth, his deepest terror. Nathan, come here. He approached slowly, as if walking toward a precipice. Grace took his hand and placed it on her stomach, covering it with her own. Feel that? That's our child, alive and growing, and I am healthy and strong. Danielle was healthy too. Nathan's voice was raw. Until she wasn't. Grace's voice turned firm. I'm not Danielle. We've discussed this. I know you're afraid, but Nathan, you can't live in fear of her fate forever. He pulled away, crossed to the window. What if I can't protect you? What if... Then don't think about losing me. Grace stood, went to him. Think about our child. Think about our future. You can't control everything, Nathan, but you can be present. Be here with me, not trapped in the past. After breakfast, Grace led Nathan to the secluded garden where Danielle's memorial stood, a simple marble stone with her name and dates. Grace knelt, placing winter roses at the base. Nathan stood frozen behind her. Danielle, Grace said softly, I never knew you, but I'm grateful for what you taught Nathan about love, even though it ended in tragedy. I promise to honor your memory by loving him well, by giving him the family you never got to have. Rest peacefully. You're not forgotten. Nathan made a choked sound. Grace stood, took his hand. She was part of your life, Nathan. I won't erase that. But I also won't let her ghost dictate our future. It's time to live, fully, with me. I kept this garden frozen in time, Nathan said, anguished, like I kept myself frozen. And now? Now I want to live, with you, for our child. I want to let go. Back at the house, the butler brought a letter from overseas. Nathan broke the seal and read aloud. Brother, I am writing from my exile to say what I should have said years ago. I'm sorry, not just for Danielle, but for the man I was, weak, entitled, consumed by jealousy. Rosie Butler's trial has concluded. She was convicted of Danielle's murder. Justice came late, but it came. I hope you found some peace. I hope you've learned to love again. You deserve that, even if I don't. Edmund. Silence filled the room. Will you write back? Grace asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me never wants to think about him again. There's no rush to decide. Some wounds take years to heal. An official letter arrived the same day. Lady Rosie Butler had been convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial had been a sensation, all of London society testifying to her schemes. Grace felt a strange mix of emotions. I should feel triumphant, but mostly I feel sad. She destroyed herself. She made her choices, Grace. You're not responsible for her fate. That afternoon, Grace met with the committee of her charity, the Second Chance Society. They helped women falsely accused of impropriety, not just clearing names, but helping build new lives. Today's case was a young woman, aged 22, accused of theft by her employer. Grace saw herself 5 years ago in those terrified eyes. We'll investigate, we'll find the truth, and regardless of what we find, we'll help you build a future. You're not defined by accusations. The young woman cried with relief. Your Grace, I didn't know where else to turn. You came to the right place. No woman should face this alone. That evening, Grace descended the grand staircase in a crimson gown, reclaiming Rosie's color as her own. Garnets glittered in her chestnut hair. Nathan waited at the bottom, still in awe after 6 months of marriage. You're wearing red. I thought it was time to reclaim that color. It was used to threaten me once. Now it's just beautiful. Everything about you is beautiful. The ballroom was filled with friends, military comrades, loyal society members, people they'd helped through the charity. Among them stood a young woman in gray, haunted eyes Grace recognized. The woman approached hesitantly. Your Grace, I was told to stay in corners after my scandal, but I heard you were once told the same. How did you escape? Grace's heart broke and mended simultaneously. I stopped believing I belonged there, and I found someone who saw me even when I was invisible. Did it hurt, coming back to life? Terribly, Grace said honestly, but it was worth it. Every moment of pain was worth it for this. Nathan offered his hand. May I have this dance, Your Grace? Is that a command or a request? Neither. It's a plea. Dance with me because you want to, not because anyone ordered it. Then yes, always yes. As they waltzed, Grace reflected on the journey, from corner to center stage, from black to crimson, from broken to whole. Do you remember what you asked me that first night? She said. You asked what I was mourning. I remember. I was wrong. I wasn't mourning her. I was becoming her. The woman I am now, strong, loved, free, she was always inside me, waiting. And the cold Duke of War? He's still there too, but he's learned to feel warmth again. Because of you, because of us. We saved each other, Grace. In the corner, the young woman in gray watched them with the first hope she'd felt in months. Grace caught her eye and smiled, encouraging, knowing. The woman smiled back, tentative but real. Months later, Grace stood in the nursery, holding their infant daughter. The baby had Nathan's dark eyes and Grace's chestnut hair. They'd named her Danielle Grace Akhtar, honoring the past while embracing the future. Nathan entered, saw his wife and daughter, and smiled, genuine, warm, unguarded. She's perfect. She is, and so are we. Perfectly imperfect, perfectly alive. They stood together at the window, looking out at the estate, at the future, at the life they'd built from ashes of scandal and grief. No longer haunted by ghosts, no longer defined by pain. They said wear black and sit in the corner forever, Grace thought. But we chose crimson, we chose dance, we chose life. And that, ultimately, was the greatest victory of all.